Today we're talking about Turok Rage Wars. The other one. This is the third in a series of portable spin-offs, and once again it has next to nothing to do with its console counterpart. But hey, no worries. This game is great. The plot of Rage Wars is introduced through an opening text crawl. It's not long, and I read all the words, but somehow I'm still a little shaky on the details. It revolves around the actions of the Amaranthine Accordance, which is a faction mentioned in the last game that I was hoping I wouldn't have to try to pronounce. From what I can gather, they're planning to colonize the Earth, and it's up to Turok to travel to 4 different planets to destroy their bases, and any Bionosaurus-related experiments. See what I mean? It's simple, but it's a lot. Honestly, I'm still stuck on Turok hopping between planets. I thought that came later. As was the case with previous portable Turok games, Rage Wars was developed by the fine people at Bit Managers. Clearly up to the task of expanding their fingerprint on the franchise, they've once again totally reinvented the stone wheel. Not only is this game wildly different than Rage Wars on the N64, it's also a massive sidestep from their previous handheld titles. Rage Wars is totally linear and sheds any last remnants of the series' exploration roots. This is an action game through and through, and on top of that, it totally drops the side-scrolling perspective. Levels are either 2.5D or top-down. Sometimes the camera scrolls, dictating your pace, and other times you can move freely. It's cool to see the same Game Boy Turok sprite running in 8 directions. And in this game, he's more fluid than ever before. Turok in Rage Wars is an absolute beast, charging forward, knifing dinosaurs, knifing plants, and even knifing his way through walls. But don't worry, I'm somewhat exaggerating. The game also has guns. In fact, since I'm on the subject, I have to say the weapons and equipment and the gameplay system surrounding them are the most interesting aspect of Rage Wars. Considering there are only 4 worlds and they're pretty short, your options are maybe a little too in-depth for what's needed. It's weird. As you explore each planet, you'll find different weapons. The pistol, the shotgun, the Uzi, and of course the blade launcher. Unlike in Battle the Bionosaurs and Turok 2, they're all pretty distinct from one another. The bow has a good range, but slow wind-up, and the shotgun has a lower rate of fire, but does more damage. Anyway, you get the idea. Everything just feels better, at least for a while. As you get deeper into the game, the enemies become tankier, and unless you read the manual, you might not realize what to do. Along with the weapons themselves, you'll also find upgrades to increase their power. And in some cases, you can even change how they function. Just look at this. Finally, a shotgun with a spread. But the fun doesn't stop there. Like I said, this game is, in some ways, needlessly complex. If the upgrades aren't enough, you can also switch between alternate types of bullets for each weapon. Oh, and if you find a toolkit, you can craft new weapons altogether. I admit that I didn't really play around too much with this mechanic, but the only combination that seemed to work for me was combining the bow and the shotgun to create a crossbow, which shoots different types of arrows without the drawback of, well, the drawback. And if that's still not enough tinkering for you, Rage Wars goes a step further and introduces a customizable shield mechanic. Turok still has a life bar, but by picking up shield tokens, he can assign them to different types of armor. Perhaps you want to protect yourself from insect bites, Or if you know you'll be entering a Dinosaur stronghold, maybe invest the points in gunfire protection instead. Seriously, they went above and beyond with all of these systems. And as interesting as they are, it really is too much. Just let Turok pick up tech armor. And instead of making us build the crossbow, hide it in some bushes or something. I'm not usually one to advocate for less effort, but nothing about the gameplay demands the need for these RPG-light mechanics. And hey, that's not a dig at the rest of Rage Wars. Aside from a few tricky sections, it's breezy and fun. You'll constantly move to new locations, battling through jungles, temples, deserts, caves, and industrial fortresses. Everything is brought to life with glorious color and solid sprite work. And it's all set to a totally rockin' soundtrack. It's so energetic and sets the tone perfectly. The variety of gameplay, however, isn't as profound as in Turok 2. Every level is basically the same thing. It's maybe not a big deal since the experience is so short, but I do miss the unexpectedness of the previous installment. Even during the rare instances when Turok goes undercover as a Dinosaur, there isn't much difference. It really seems like I was supposed to slow down and be sneaky, but I just continued my killing rampage and the game never punished me for it. Even the bosses, cool as they are, don't really change things up. They're all fought from a top-down perspective and turn the game into a bit of a shmup. Turok will need to bob and weave to dodge projectiles, firing back when it's safe. Luckily, his movement is super snappy, so it never feels like you're fighting against the controls. With a single unfortunate exception. One level early on does stand out, but not in a good way. I'm talking about the rafting sequence. The jumping in this game isn't great, but aside from this area, you don't have to do too much of it. At most, you'll have to clear an electrified floor panel or some spiky rocks. If you miss, Turok takes a hit and you move on. The river level, however, demands a lot more precision. In theory, you could stay on the raft the whole time, but when enemies start taking pot shots from the shore, you'll start to struggle. There's just not a lot of room to move. So in most cases, you'll be better off jumping from island to island. Plus, that's where you'll find all the health and weapon pickups. The problem is, missing a jump and landing in the water results in an instant death. Nowhere else in this game can you burn through lives quite so quickly. And considering how early you'll have to face this challenge, I can see it being a stopping point for some. Even the cave level later on, which introduces similarly dangerous bottomless pits, doesn't feel nearly as cruel. My only other complaint is the enemy AI. By and large, they only have two modes of attack: shooting from stationary positions or charging forward. This tends to make a lot of fights feel very similar. For the shooters, you prioritize dodging their projectiles and fire back when you have a safe opening. As long as you're patient, you won't have a problem. And with the chargers, it's just a matter of retreating. They'll only follow you so far, which means you can easily reposition and swing back to finish them off. The only times things get really hairy is when the two types of enemies work together. But even then, it's never too daunting. If someone put a gun to my head and asked me to choose between the handheld Turok games, well, first of all, I'd be very confused. But if they insisted on an answer, I'd probably go with Turok 2. That's not a blow against Rage Wars, however. They're both great games and it's very close. You should definitely try this one. Besides, who are you to refuse the light burden? The Armantine Accordance must be stopped at all costs. Marthine?